Hello Vampire Counts. In this video I'm going to talk about how to assemble metal models in general and specifically how I assembled this Abyssal Horror, also called a Winged Nightmare. I'm not sure where the name Winged Nightmare came from. I looked in the SoulBlight GraveLords battle tome and I couldn't find it in there. But it looks like it's called an Abyssal Horror in Vampire Counts. Now, it may be called a Winged Nightmare depending on what you have on its back. Like maybe if it's got a Vampire Count, it's called a Winged Nightmare. And if it's called, if it's got a Necromancer on its back, it's called Abyssal Horror. I don't know. It looked like they were both called Abyssal Horror. You can leave me in the comments if you know. So here's how he turned out. Pretty cool. He's mounted on a 50 by 100 millimeter base. And I found that information here because when I looked it up online, like I normally do, it only, the posts were from like 2007, so it was probably 8th edition Vampire Counts. And he was mounted on a 50 millimeter base, which would leave me a question about where his tail would go, right? Maybe just hanging off of it. If he's on a 50 by 50 base. But definitely his feet could be mounted on it. The way that I mounted his feet on here is I took the metal posts that were coming out of the bottom of the feet and kind of made scratch marks on the base, and then I used my Dremel tool here, and I used a drill bit like this. I don't think this drill bit actually came with the Dremel kit, but it's just like a standard drill bit. Looks like about 1/8 or maybe 3/16. So 1/8 would be 4 millimeter, I believe. 4.5 millimeter, something like that, drill bit. And when I drilled it, it was too close together. So what I did is I stuck the drill bit in there while it was running and kind of reamed it out, like in both directions a little bit, so that it was fitting tight against the outside. And then I got it to go in there with some super glue. And I super glued the tail down too and put something heavy on it, but it didn't quite set. I didn't use any activator, which I'll talk about later. But I'm okay with his tail being up off the ground. I think he actually looks pretty cool like that. He's just, weight is just support on his feet. So once the posts were super glued, then they stayed in there, those slotted, those slots that I made with the drill pretty well. Pardon me one second. Sorry, I caught a cold. Okay, and then when I got the Abyssal Horror, I got it on eBay. And it looks like it's been cleaned, like they removed the paint that was on it, which is probably a good thing because I've seen some pretty bad paint jobs, you know, in those old contrasting colors from the 90s. So it's probably not a bad thing. And you can tell the difference in the metal. Also, when you get these things on eBay, a lot of times I think maybe the wings come from different models and stuff because they weren't quite compatible. So one of the wings had an outie. It was male, right? It had a little post sticking out of it at the end of the wing. And the other one it was female and had an innie, but that innie was on a tube. And I was like, well, they should have both been like an innie so that I could mount it on the torso, which had an outie. But with that tube, it would actually not mount up flush the wings wouldn't mount up flush to the torso. So I decided to remove that tube. So I ground it down with my Dremel tool, right? And I used this right here, which is a grinding pad with emery cloth on it, I believe. Something that can grind metal. And I ground it off there fairly easily. That worked out pretty well. And then what I did is I didn't have to use like a nail set, which you normally have to do to get the hole centered where you want it, like a centering tool, I think some people call it, because there was already a little dip in there from where it was female on inside that tube. So I was just able to use this bit on the Dremel tool. And this was like a large set of different Dremel tools, which I'd recommend. These things are awesome. It kind of looks like a little pumpkin on the end with kind of ridges. And I imagine it's probably made out of industrial diamond because it drilled through that metal super, super easy. The only thing you want to make sure is that it's the, as you're looking down at it, it's turning clockwise. So it would be turning, I guess it would be turning counterclockwise as you're facing it. But as you're drilling, the drill itself is actually spinning clockwise. So you want to make sure of that. And then it'll go through there real easily. If nothing's happening, check the direction of your drill bit. And that may be why you're having trouble. On the other side, I had to use a nail set, like a hammer and a nail, to make a little bevel in there once I got it ground down so it was level, because it had an outie. It had a male post on it, which wasn't compatible with the male post that was coming out of the torso. Since the male posts coming out of the torso were flat and flush up against the torso, I decided to use those rather than anything that was on the wing and modify the torso. Although it would have been a little easier to drill the torso than it was the wing. And then I used super glue to put these wings on. And because of the center of gravity of the wings, you can't really prop it up with something, like have it laying on its side and prop it up so that it's held up like that, because it keeps falling over because it's heavier on this edge than it is on this edge, I guess, is why it is. So it would always flop over and it wouldn't hold flush. So what I used, and I don't use this stuff very often, it's kind of a nasty chemical, but this was the greatest thing. On the second wing, I actually just held it with my fingers until it was hard enough, and then I set it up like this. I set it up like this so that the wing was more vertical as it finished drying, but it was strong enough to do that. So I sprayed a little bit of this on super glue. I put some super glue on the torso, and then I sprayed just a quick little spray on there. If you don't spray very long and you just do a dot, it can do that small area without a lot of stink or anything. And of course, I'm glad I remembered to mention this, make sure you're wearing your very stylish safety glasses whenever you're drilling with a Dremel tool on metal models, because if you get a little piece of metal in your eye, that will not be good for your health. And I think that's about it. The next time you see this model, it will be at least primed, if not zenithelled, and maybe even painted. That may be a while. I'm not sure whether I'm going to work on a 4,000 point Bretonnian army first or a Vampire Count's army first. I'm kind of leaning towards Bretonnian because I'm hoping that they'll actually publish an army list, a real army list that's in a book by the time that I build my 4,000 point Vampire Count army next year, or at least maybe an arcane journal. or something like that, which may give me some more options. I'm kind of disappointed that more of the Age of Sigmar vampires are not included in this army. It's really mostly a skeleton and ghoul army, or a skeleton and zombie army, more than like a vampire army. And I know making it a legacy army, they had their reasons, but they say the scope of this project has changed, so I'm really holding out hope that they'll actually make official publications for the armies that they haven't done yet, 7 of them or whatever. Let's see, there's vampire counts, there's chaos dwarves, there's dark elves, there's some more, maybe 6. I can't remember if Chaos Demons is one of them, or if they actually have that army. I'm certainly working on that too. Beastmen, I think, is going to be an army. Maybe not. Maybe that's another one. But there's some armies that they haven't committed to making yet. Of course, there's the ones from, what is it called? WarHammer 3 or whatever, that video game that ends in 3. There's some cool factions in that game that at one point they said they were going to make, and then they said they weren't. So we'll see what happens. I got a guy to mount on this thing. He's called like a Necro or something like that. And I got him cheap on eBay. He was mounted on one of those plastic skeletal horses from Tomb Kings. That's why it was so cheap, because they didn't have the mount. But it's actually harder for me to find the mounted figures than it is the mounts themselves on eBay. So I was happy to find that. It was like $23 or something like that. Maybe I paid shipping, I can't remember. Like $5. He will be my guy on there. And then I could decide, there's 2 options for Abyssal Horrors. There's a vampire count, or there's a necromancer. I can decide which of them I want to make him, maybe modify him, kit bash him a little bit. Although he's going to be metal, so maybe not. I hate to do that to them. Excuse me once. This cold is really messing with me. All right, I just want to look over everything. 50 by 100 base, Dremel tool. I set it to the slowest speed. I think that's about it. That's what you need to build metal models. Thank you, Vampire Counts.